Hi, Misha here, and last couple of aircraft videos we've very much looked at the West, specifically the US. Now it's time to look at Russia, because we have a new 1/72 scale diecast from Hobbymaster. This is their latest Mig-31 Foxhound. Last year we looked at their first two. And I brought out a Mig-25 Foxbat just briefly to talk about it. Mostly we're going to talk about really the difference between the MiG-31B and the MiG-31BM. Very much in service today and plan to be in service for at least the next decade, give or take. Even the Foxbat was only taken out of frontline Russian service just over a decade ago. So they really did outlast the Cold War. And I think they're really cool aircraft from MiG. And it's great that Hobbymaster is doing these. Again, 1/72 scale diecast. And with that, let's just briefly recap the MiG-25 PD over here. This started off as a dedicated interceptor designed to, well, intercept foreign bombers, later reconnaissance aircraft, and essentially patrol the skies. And plans went back to the 1950s. The first prototype flew in 1964, and the earliest pre-production models were being shown off by 1967 and would enter into service late 60s, early 70s. You would actually have a couple of versions. There would be the 25R reconnaissance flown by the VVS and the 25P flown by the PVO, the Air Defense Forces. And that's what this is here. The original used the Smerch radar system, extremely powerful for its day and time, but it was not look down, shoot down capable. And then the whole Viktor Belenko incident in 1976 led to the 25PD with the improved Sapphire radar, which began to introduce look down, shoot down capabilities, as well as many other updates to the design. And it also convinced Russia to export the Foxbat. Originally, this was going to be just for their use, but after the cat was out of the bag, they decided to sell these about, including to Libya and Iraq. This was a very fast aircraft for its day and time, had very good climb. It could get well over 70,000 feet, and in certain tests it could go over 100,000 feet altitude. It could hit Mach 2.8. It could even go over Mach 3, but this threatened to do irreparable damage to the engines. They would basically tear themselves apart. Heat was a concern. But it wasn't the most maneuverable, especially at lower altitudes. No cannon on board. Only one crew member, although early on they did consider two, but instead it had a link to the ground and it would be partially directed to a target from there. So its ordnance, well, originally were 4 long-range R-40 air-to-air missiles. You had the R-40R and R-40T thermal versus radar-guided. And they would usually carry a pair of each. But later on, especially with the PD here, some would forego 2 of the R-40s and instead carry a total of 4 R-60 short-range air-to-air visual range defense missiles. So you had 2 long-range and 4 close-in, which let it be not a dogfighter. This never ever would be, but it gave it a little something extra, because the R-40 was designed to take down bombers at range, not fighters. I mention this because Iraq actually employed the MiG-25 rather successfully against Iran in the 80s, and this was really the only Iraqi aircraft to have success at all in the 1991 Gulf War. Iraqi MiG-25 shot down an F-18 Hornet on January 17, 1991. 2 weeks later, January 30, another one did damage to a F-15 Eagle, but didn't actually shoot it down. And while more than a couple of the MiG-25s were shot down by coalition aircraft, it was one of the few Iraqi jets that could go toe-to-toe, and if it couldn't win, it could at least get away. Most others didn't even enjoy that. I just wanted to mention that. It was very impressive. Russia used these to tangle with SR-71s in the 80s, but it wasn't perfect, and they knew that from the get-go. And that is actually how we would end up with the MiG-31 Foxhound. And good God, is this big. The Foxbat was about 65 feet by 46 feet. The Foxhound is over 73 feet long, although it does have a slightly narrower wingspan at about 44.5 feet. But overall, it's a much more massive aircraft. And this is the early version we looked at in a past video with the original armament. But the two really were connected at the beginning. Work on this would begin in 1971 with the first prototype flying in 1975. And I don't want to say it was just a Foxbat with an extended nose and cockpit, but it's kind of how it started off, but not how it would end. And then it would be put into very low rate production in 1976 as they continued to refine the design. Also, the Belenko incident would cause changes that would actually allow the MiG-31 to be Russia's first, from the beginning, look down, shoot down capable aircraft. But of course, this technology would come across with the MiG-23 and the MiG-25 as well. By 1979, it was ordered to be put into full rate production, and by May of 1981, it was officially being flown by the PVO to defend vast Russian airspace, especially in the northern regions. You might have noticed Russia's big, and a lot of it, especially in the north, is not necessarily all that well developed or accessible all year round. And if there ever were to be an attack, it would come from the north. Therefore, the PVO needed to patrol a lot of area. So one of the goals with the Foxhound, of course that's the NATO name, was to give it about twice the range, endurance, and also greatly expand its ability to engage targets and more targets at greater range. And much like with the Foxbat, a lot of the internal volume was given over to fuel. You'll notice there are no external tanks on the Foxhound. Originally the Foxbat didn't have one either, but the later versions could have that one big tank in the center. Other ways it improved had to do with the handling. Maximum top speed was still about Mach 2.8, but where it was better, it was a little more maneuverable, but its really low altitude performance was increased. It had better handling, and it could go supersonic up to about Mach 1.2 at sea level. And this was achieved by really strengthening the wing, the frame, and of course kind of going to this new kind of design that definitely greatly increased its capabilities. It could also engage targets much lower to the ground. It still had a maximum altitude of 80,000 feet, although in practice, of course, fully loaded would be less. And of course it had a crew of 2 versus 1, pilot in the front, radar operator, weapons officer in the rear. It continued to have not just a data link with the ground, but also a system to communicate with, link with friendly aircraft. In fact, these could be used essentially as controllers using their very advanced radar to help guide other aircraft like the MiG-23, MiG-29, Mishaco, Su-27, so on and so forth. Again, they were really meant to kind of just command an area of 500 square miles or so. Just take it all in. They typically were in flights of 4. And they could stay aloft for quite an amount of time. Still having 2 massive engines. And the radar would continue to be improved while they were in service. But what about their weapons? Their offensive capabilities? Well, that's actually why I brought out the Foxbat. Because early on, these would carry the same missiles. R-60s for self-defense. That would be under the total of 4 underwing hardpoints. But unlike the Foxbat, the Foxhound actually has 4 semi-recessed hardpoints under the fuselage, and technically a 5th in the center, although it's more of a special purpose. But it can only carry 2 R-40s under the fuselage because of the layout. And it could carry 4 R-60s. But we're just talking early on. From the get-go, better, more advanced weapons with longer ranges and better seeking capabilities were on the drawing board. By the mid-80s, you had a new long-range missile, the R-33 here. This greatly expanded the capabilities versus the R-40. It was a big missile too, well over 1,000 pounds. And the R-60 would eventually give way to the R-73. And that's the ordnance on this aircraft here. But again, the original MiG-31, it was produced in the largest run, lasting from the late 70s up to about 1988, consisting of just under 350 aircraft. But this is a MiG-31B. And that would really be from the second/third run. The second run technically was from 1989 through 1991 and was a bit of a transitional experimental series known as the MiG-31DZ. These were all-weather, all-altitude. They usually had aerial refueling capabilities. They had enhanced radar systems. And they were starting to be designed to work with newer ordnance. But of course, the end of the Cold War would get in the way and the collapse of the USSR. There had actually already been an effort known as the MiG-31M to update this design, to modernize it, but they never got past about 6 pre-production there. But they did start making the MiG-31B in 1990, and it had a production run of 69 aircraft, but the final ones off the lines in 1994. And that's what we have here. This standardized the aerial refueling. It had a much more expanded radar capability. It could track and engage multiple targets. It had enhanced flight controls, avionics. It used the latest version of the R-33. And by this point, the R-73 was really replacing the R-60 on this aircraft. And now it can hold 4 short/medium range and 4 long range missiles under the fuselage. So quite a bit expanded from the only 4 hard points and up to 6 missiles of the Foxbat. Now, with the disillusionment of the USSR, the majority of the MiG-31B fleet would actually go to Kazakhstan. 50 of the 69 would go there. So what Russia would do, the Russian Federation, they would update some older MiG-31s to the new standard. Also some of the older 31DZs. So while they would have a handful of truly new production Bs, the majority of the ones in service in Russia would be updated from older. But the economics really weren't with them in the 90s, so not much would change. Oh, one other ordnance I almost forgot. Originally, this had a 23mm cannon with about 260 rounds. Kind of learning the lesson that America did in Vietnam, too. But yeah, the 31B, along with the latest versions of the 25, would serve in the Russian Air Force throughout the 90s and into the 21st century, really being unchanged from the days of the USSR. But in 2008, well, change would finally happen, and that gets us to the new model today. At this time, a new standard, the MiG-31BM, appears. This would be a comprehensive modernization of the design. They would get liquid crystal displays in the cockpit, more advanced control surfaces. They would actually end up getting better armor for the glass, stronger glass. One thing I'm actually happy to see they did was they gave this little rear-facing periscope on the cockpit canopy. A little thing they added. Of course, the radar continued to be updated. The data link went all digital. New flight computers. And of course, access to new weapons. In 2011, testing began with the R-37M, at least as regards to the Foxhound. This is actually not much heavier than the R-33, but has almost twice the range thanks to a new advanced solid fuel rocket motor, and really just more efficient trajectories, kind of an arcing trajectory when it's launched. And that's really thanks to the new computer ability to calculate what have you. And the first actual squadrons will start deploying with the R-37M in 2018. Now on the wings here we see the R-77. I believe it's a -1. This is supposed to be the replacement for the R-73, but the jury's still out on just how many Russia's fielding. But when you look at models of newer Russian aircraft, they're all sporting them. So these were definitely cleared to use the R-77, but we can debate in reality if they are. So more weapons there. Also, some newer aircraft would get rid of the 23mm cannon, but not all of them. And of course, you'd have some specialized variants like the MiG-31K, which was actually Hobbymaster's very first model, and we looked at it. Essentially, the MiG-31BM turned what was before an interceptor into a multi-role aircraft. When the Foxhound was introduced back in the 80s, It was designed to combat American bombers like the B-1B, but really specifically cruise missiles fired from them or submarines. It was designed to be fast enough and have good enough avionics, good enough weapons to actually shoot down a cruise missile. It was also designed to intercept the SR-71 Blackbird or any similar reconnaissance aircraft. I mention that because with the multi-role ability added, ironically, the MiG-31K went from being an aircraft shooting down cruise missiles to one launching them. The K got rid of all of its external weapon stores, except for a single hard point on the middle of the fuselage, launching a massive, although extremely long-range, missile. There would also be versions with like KH-31 variants, KH-59s. You'd see anti-shipping, you would see anti-radiation, so seed roll aircraft, even guided surface to air, or excuse me, air to surface, that'd be a trick, bombs, up to 6 of them. The original MiG-25 could only drop iron bombs, and frankly the original MiG-31 really wasn't that much more focused on attack. But with the MiG-31BM, yeah, you have a true multi-role fighter attack aircraft. It's pretty interesting, at least from just, looking at the hardware point of view. Even today, even though production has been over for 30 years, Russia is still planning to field these until at least the 2030s. Now, of course, we have to mention that these have been fielded first in Crimea. They would send a flight of 4 Foxhounds there. And then, of course, they would be employed in Ukraine in 2022, 2023. And, well, I guess fortunately for Russia, unfortunately for the Ukrainian military, Ukraine really had nothing with the range even close to the R-37M that the Foxhound could launch. Meaning that these could be used to pretty devastating effect if improperly employed. And of course if they were kept in good repair and were allowed to do their thing. My position on that has been clear on the channel for years, but just talking about the military hardware, regardless, I actually really respect a lot of the capabilities here. If nothing else, I find it mechanically and historically quite interesting. In fact, the total payload is about 20,000 pounds, which is greater than, say, an F-4 Phantom. So, okay, not the biggest in the world, but for an aircraft with this range and speed and other abilities, it's not nothing. But when Hobbymaster released this modernized version, there's a few changes to the plane itself, and of course you have the newer ordnance under the fuselage. So I had to pick it up, because this is very much important in the Russian military today. Most are flown by the aerospace forces, over 100, but the Russian Navy operates a couple of dozen, although I don't know if all of them have been updated to the new BM or BSM standard. Apologies about my voice. I'm kind of fighting off being sick or getting over it. Darn time of the year. But I was just really excited to talk about this new model. I'm really happy with it. It might look identical, but like I pointed out with the canopy, in hand you'll notice small little differences. And of course the ordnance is pretty nice too. And this is the stand that these come with. Note that it's a little different than the Hobbymaster stands you can buy. at least the base. I like it. It at least allows full weapons carriage. Of course, this one's on the older stand, but I never hated the one that the Foxbat came with. It was a solid stand because it was metal. Both of these molds are very big and very heavy. So if you put one on a shelf, take account of that. And these are actually very tall on these stands. But I'm super happy Hobby Master has done these. They're doing one for the Kazakh Air Force, which is frankly the only foreign user of the Foxhound. After the fall of the USSR, Russia did consider an export model known as the MiG-31E that had the typical downgraded avionics and whatnot. And they did try marketing it to a few customers. Finland comes to mind. But in the end, there were no takers. Unlike the Foxbat, which was exported, they would build not quite 1,200 Foxbats, and they would build 519 Foxhounds, with again the majority, basically 350, being the original model, but most of those have been updated, if they weren't scrapped, to the new BM standard. So yeah, also some of the DZs were updated as well. That's why you kind of end up with things like the BSM and BM, and they all really are the same thing, the same standard. Although, as of last year, Russia was still receiving back from the factory updated Foxhounds, and with each batch, more minor improvements and new technical, products are installed. At least when Russia can actually obtain them. Sanctions and all that have made some of the high-tech stuff not the easiest to find in Russia these days. Maybe someone should tell Putin to take Tucker Carlson to the aircraft factory. Think about it. If Tucker was that overjoyed with a Russian supermarket, he'd get a real kick out of their airplane manufacturing. I actually visited the Sukhoi plant back in 2005. Good God, nearly 20 years ago now. Oh well. Like I said, apologies for being a little under the weather, but I just really wanted to talk about this one. So, even if the body wasn't really up for it, the mind was, and I did my best for you. But sorry for any goofiness if I'm a little off my stride right now, but I'll be fine. Working always makes me feel better. But no, I'm very pleased with the 31BM. I doubt I'll buy the Kazakh Air Force one, because I'm really trying to cut back on model spending. So it'd have to do something pretty special. But I kind of feel good. I've got a early version, relatively early anyway. I've got a late version, and I've got the original first release, the 31K, which is a cool version to have a cruise missile underneath it. So I'm happy. And I've done full videos on the 25 in the past, looking at the P, the PD, the PDS, including getting into the Victor Blanco story, which is a very interesting story in and of itself, including Japan and Russia sending each other bills back and forth. Anywho, guys, I'm going to let my voice rest. This is Misha. Catch you very soon, probably with another Russian plane video next time.